Imagine spending your entire career becoming untouchable at one event, and then walking away from it on purpose. That's exactly what one of the greatest athletes on the planet did. She had 6 of the fastest times in history in her signature event. 2 Olympic golds, a world record, total dominance. Nobody does that. And then she quit. She switched to a race so brutal that coaches call it controlled panic. A race with a 40-year-old record so fast, so suspicious, so wrapped in Cold War doping scandals, that people genuinely believed no woman alive would ever get close to it again. She got closer than anyone in 4 decades. And 3 days later, she did something even crazier. Stick around, because by the end of this video you're going to understand exactly how rare what happened in Tokyo really was, and why track and field experts are saying the record books are about to be rewritten all over again. Subscribe reminder. Before we get into it, if you love stories about athletes doing the impossible, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we cover moments like this every single week. Now let's get into it. Part 1. The woman who walked away from her own kingdom. For years, McLaughlin Levrone wasn't just good at the 400-meter hurdles. She owned it. She was the first woman ever to dip under 52 seconds, then the first to dip under 51. She held a world record of 50.37. She had 2 Olympic gold medals hanging around her neck. At one point, she held 6 of the 10 fastest times ever recorded in that event. Nobody was within shouting distance of her. So when word got out in 2025 that she was walking away from the hurdles to run the flat 400 meters instead, the track world nearly short-circuited. Why would anyone give up a throne to start over somewhere else, in one of the most physically punishing races that exists? Sydney knew exactly what people were saying. She admitted it herself after her now legendary race in Tokyo. She was well aware how many people doubted the switch. And honestly, the skepticism made sense on paper. The flat 400 doesn't reward technique. It doesn't reward rhythm over 10 hurdles. There's nothing to hide behind. It's pure velocity and pain management, and it has a well-earned reputation for humbling even the most decorated sprinters on the planet. Here's the thing about the Open 400. It's too long to sprint from start to finish, but too short to save anything for later. Everyone who runs it eventually hits the wall. That moment around 250 to 300 meters in where lactic acid floods the muscles and every stride starts to feel like wading through wet cement. The athletes who win aren't always the fastest. They're the ones who manage that wall the best. Sydney had already learned that lesson the hard way. Part 2. The loss that changed everything. Back in 2023, in Paris, Sydney ran the Open 400 against Marileidy Paulino, the reigning Olympic champion from the Dominican Republic. Sydney went out hard, led for most of the race, and looked like she might steal the show in an event that wasn't even her specialty. Then the wall hit. In the final meters, Paulino, a seasoned 400-meter specialist who knew exactly how to ration her effort, came flying past her. Sydney lost. And more importantly, she learned something about herself. Raw talent wasn't going to be enough in this event. She needed an entirely different blueprint. So she went back to her longtime coach, Bobby Kersee, the same coach who had already built her into the greatest hurdler of her generation, and got to work. Alongside former UCLA sprinter Willington Wright, Kersee designed a training block with one terrifying goal: break 48 seconds. A barrier that hadn't fallen in 40 years. Only one woman in history had ever gone under it. Marileidy Koch of East Germany ran 47.60 all the way back in 1985, during the height of the East German state-sponsored doping program, a fact that has cast a permanent shadow over that number ever since. For 4 decades, it just sat there, untouched, almost mythical. Sydney's path back to the Open 400 wasn't a straight line, either. She tried the event in 2023, only for injuries to wreck her championship plans. She went back to hurdles in 2024, picked up a second Olympic gold, and reset her own world record to 50.37 in Paris. But the flat 400 kept pulling at her. In 2025, she finally committed for good, and the entire sport held its breath, wondering if she'd just made the biggest gamble of her career. Part 3. The first warning shot. The first sign that something enormous was coming arrived in the semifinal round in Tokyo. Sydney ran 48.29, obliterating a 19-year-old American record that had belonged to Sonia Richards-Ross. And even after posting a time that would have shocked most fans, Sydney said afterward she still had more left in the tank. That's the kind of statement that makes an entire stadium nervous. Part 4. Race Day. Tokyo delivered exactly the kind of atmosphere you'd expect for a night like this. Thick humidity all day, followed by evening rain that cooled the air and left the track slick and unpredictable. Fittingly, it was the same national stadium where Sydney had set her very first hurdles world record back in 2021. The lane draw added its own drama. Sydney got lane 5, a good, central lane where she could see the entire field. Paulino was stuck out in lane 9, the worst possible draw for a 400-meter runner, since it means racing essentially blind, with no visual reference for anyone else in the race. Paulino later admitted just how disorienting that was, saying she had nothing to gauge her effort against. When the gun went off, Sydney didn't explode out of the blocks the way some 400-meter specialists do. She had learned her lesson in Paris. This time, patience came first. Through the opening 200 meters, she sat in good position without trying to force anything. Coming off the final turn, she looked smooth, controlled, almost unbothered, carrying a slim lead into the most dangerous part of the race. And this is where the open 400 shows its teeth. This is the stretch where careers are made and unraveled in the same 10 seconds. Behind her, Paulino was charging, drawing on every ounce of championship experience she had. Down the home straight, the two of them were locked in a genuine fight, something Sydney, whose recent hurdles races had mostly been solo time trials against the clock, hadn't experienced in years. Instead of tightening up under the pressure, she loosened. With around 30 meters left, she had built a gap of roughly 4 body lengths. But Paulino wasn't finished. She kept closing, form fraying but well intact, right up to the line. Both women lunged at the tape in one of the most dramatic finishes the event has ever produced. Part 5. The numbers that broke the internet. When the clock stopped, the stadium erupted. Sydney had run 47.78, the second fastest time in the history of the women's 400 meters and the fastest anyone had run in 40 years. But the real jaw-dropper was what happened behind her. Paulino crossed in 47.98. For the first time ever, two women had gone under 48 seconds in the very same race. Sydney's own reaction told the story better than any commentator could. She looked up at the scoreboard, grabbed her head with both hands, and stood there in total disbelief. Even she hadn't fully expected this. Afterward, she credited Paulino directly, saying you don't run a time like that without someone incredible pushing you to it. Coach Bobby Kersee had actually predicted this exact scenario before the race, telling reporters he believed someone was going to need a genuine 47-point-something to win it. He knew Paulino wasn't going to fold without a fight, and he'd trained Sydney with that exact possibility in mind. And Paulino, despite missing gold by the narrowest of margins, wasn't devastated at all. She said she felt thankful just to be part of breaking 48 seconds, calling it a personal win after 5 years of daily training pointed at exactly this moment. Rounding out the podium was Solwa Eid Nazer of Bahrain in 48.19, a time that, in either of the previous 2 world championships, would have been good enough for gold. That's how absurdly deep this particular field was. Nazer, who had beaten Sydney in past meetings, made a bold prediction of her own afterward. She said flatly that she believed the world record wouldn't survive much longer. Coming from someone who had raced Sydney up close, that statement carried real weight. Suddenly, Coke's 47.60, a number that had felt bulletproof for 40 years, didn't look quite so safe anymore. Part 6. The encore nobody saw coming. Most athletes, after a race like that, would spend the next several days recovering. Sydney had 3 days before her next event, the anchor leg of the 4x400-meter relay for Team USA. The relay is a completely different animal. It's not just about speed, it's about trust, timing, and clean handoffs under pressure. And Team USA made an aggressive decision heading into the final. They scrapped the entire lineup that had run in the heats and started fresh. Isabella Whitaker would lead off, Lena Irby-Jackson would run the second leg, Aaliyah Butler the third, and Sydney would anchor. None of the 4 had run a single round of the relay before that final. It was a bold statement of confidence. From the opening step, it was clear this wasn't going to be a normal race. Whitaker tore off the line and ran 50.12 to hand the USA an early lead. Then Irby Jackson took over and delivered a leg that bordered on absurd, 48.71 seconds, a split that would be impressive as a standalone individual result, let alone the second leg of a relay. By the halfway mark, the U.S. lead had ballooned past 10 meters, an almost unheard-of gap in a race normally decided by hundredths of a second. Butler kept the foot on the gas with a 49.96 leg, and by the time she handed off to Sydney, the lead was close to 2 full seconds, an eternity in elite sprinting. At that point, Sydney could have jogged home and still won gold comfortably. Instead, she ran like the race was still in doubt, tearing off a 47.82 anchor split, barely off her individual 400-meter time from just 3 days earlier, and this time running out of a relay exchange in rain-slick conditions rather than out of the blocks. Team USA finished in 3 minutes and 16.61 seconds, breaking a championship record that had stood since 1993 and posting the 5th fastest time in the history of the women's 4x400. What made it even more remarkable, every single one of the 4 American legs was the fastest split run by any country at that stage of the race. Not 1 or 2 of them, all 4. Jamaica took silver in 3 minutes and 19.25 seconds, a season best for them, but still nearly 3 seconds back, a canyon in relay terms. Jamaican runner Stacey Ann Williams said afterward that her team knew going in just how tough it would be to close out a race with Sydney and Netherlands star Fimpbol both anchoring. But that trust between teammates carried them to the silver anyway. The Netherlands claimed bronze in 3 minutes and 20.18 seconds, anchored by Bol, Sydney's longtime rival in the hurdles, who ran a very strong 49.10 herself, but never had a realistic shot at closing a 2-second gap. Bol, gracious afterward, said she was proud of the work her team put in and happy to leave the championships with 3 total medals: gold in the hurdles, silver in the mixed relay, and now bronze here. Part 7. What it all means. In the space of 1 week, Sydney McLaughlin Levrone ran the second fastest open 400 meters ever recorded, came within 0.2 of a second of a 40-year-old record clouded by doping controversy, and then anchored a relay squad to a 32-year-old championship record, all on a wet track, all off a gamble that could easily have blown up in her face. She had already proven she was the best hurdler alive. Now she'd proven she could step into one of track's most unforgiving events, with almost no margin for error, and come out the other side rewriting history. Nazar's comment lingers over all of it. The world record might not survive much longer. And after watching what happened in Tokyo, it's getting harder and harder to bet against that. Bonus: the historical context you need to know. To really appreciate what happened in Tokyo, it helps to understand exactly how strange the record book for the women's 400 meters has been for the last several decades. The East German era. Marita Koch's 47.60, set in 1985, came out of a period when East Germany ran a state-organized doping program across its entire elite sports system, something that was later confirmed through government documents uncovered after reunification. Several other track and field marks from that same era, in both the 400 and 800 meters, have carried similar suspicion for decades, and multiple governing bodies have debated over the years whether to formally annotate or reset records from that period. None of those proposals ever removed Koch's mark from the books, which is part of why it stood, technically unbroken, for so long. Why nobody got close for so long. Between the late 1980s and the mid-2020s, the closest anyone came to Koch's number was still more than half a second slower. Athletes like Marie-José Pérec, Kathy Freeman, Sonia Richards-Ross, and later Allyson Felix all ran brilliant careers in the low to mid 49-second range without ever seriously threatening the 47-second barrier. The modern wave. What made 2025 different was the emergence of a genuine depth of talent at the very top of the event at the same time. Paulino, Nazar, and now McLaughlin Levrone were all capable of running under 48 seconds in the same race, something that had literally never happened before in the sport's history. The hurdles to flat pipeline. Sydney isn't the first hurdler to make a run at the Open 400, but she's the first to do it this successfully. Historically, hurdlers who tried the switch struggled with the different pacing demands of a race with no barriers to break up the rhythm. Her success may open the door for other elite hurdlers to consider the same move in future seasons. What's next? With Nazar publicly predicting the world record is vulnerable, And with Sydney still relatively new to the event, most observers inside the sport expect this record to keep getting chased hard over the next couple of seasons, potentially at the next World Championships or the following Olympic Games.